The depths of the Great Depression were a grim era, but nowhere was the darkness more palpable than in the decaying, transient underbelly of Cleveland, Ohio. In the mid-1930s, a predator began operating in the shanty towns and forgotten industrial dumps around Kingsbury Run, a creek bed that served as a hideout for the city's homeless and impoverished. This killer was not merely taking lives, he was performing acts of chilling, almost artistic dismemberment. The victims were often decapitated, their limbs severed, and their bodies drained of blood, left as gruesome, deliberate exhibits. This was the reign of the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, a serial killer whose surgical precision and elusive nature terrified a city already struggling to survive and challenged the authority of Eliot Ness, the famed lawman who was then the city's safety director. The official tally of victims attributed to the torso killer, based on the signature of decapitation and dismemberment, is between 12 and 13, committed between 1935 and 1938. However, the true number is speculated to be much higher, given the transient nature of the victims and the difficulty in identifying the severed remains. The killer's modus operandi was consistent and horrifying. The bodies were often found naked, frequently clean, and meticulously cut into pieces, often with chemical burns applied to the skin to impede identification. The decapitation itself was performed with unsettling skill, suggesting the perpetrator possessed deep anatomical knowledge or training in butchery or surgery. The first official victim was found in September 1935, a man whose head was never recovered, found near Jackass Hill in Kingsbury Run. The second victim, found in the same area, was a woman later identified as Florence Polillo, the only female victim and one of the few victims ever positively identified. Her identification was a rare win for the police, as it provided a brief, tantalizing glimpse into the life of one of the killer's prey. The torso killer exclusively targeted the marginalized, drifters, prostitutes, and the working poor, making identification almost impossible and allowing the killer to operate with a terrible kind of impunity in the shadows of society. The investigation was led by Safety Director Eliot Ness, famous for his role in bringing down Al Capone. Ness and his team, the so-called untouchables, faced the most challenging case of their careers. Ness was frustrated by the killer's ability to evade detection and by the public's perception that the police were helpless. Ness poured massive resources into the case, but the killer seemed to taunt the authorities. In one instance, a torso was dropped near the police station itself, a brazen act of defiance that showed the killer's terrifying confidence and intimate knowledge of the city's operations. The most bizarre and chilling aspect of the torso murders was the constant separation of the head from the body and the subsequent failure to find many of the victims' heads. The killer seemed purposefully to withhold the key to identification, ensuring his victims remained nameless ghosts. This suggested a powerful psychological motive linked to control and the ultimate obliteration of the victim's identity. The severed heads, when occasionally found, bore distinct signs of brutalization, often covered in burns or damage, reinforcing the killer's signature of both surgical skill and raw malice. The hunt focused intensely on Kingsbury Run, a desolate area that was part industrial wasteland, part homeless encampment. Ness ordered a complete, massive search of the area. One night in August 1938, frustrated by the lack of progress and determined to flush the killer out, Ness ordered the shanty towns in the run to be burned to the ground. This controversial action, though intended to destroy the killer's hiding places and eliminate the transient population he preyed upon, was ultimately ineffective in catching the butcher and drew heavy criticism for destroying the homes of the city's most vulnerable. One of the most compelling suspects in the case was Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, a prominent Cleveland physician and World War I veteran known for his surgical skill. Sweeney had a strong connection to the area and was reportedly suffering from severe alcoholism and psychological trauma. He was an intense focus of Eliot Ness's investigation. Ness was convinced Sweeney was the killer and repeatedly questioned him, even forcing him to submit to polygraph tests, which were unreliable at the time. Sweeney reportedly failed the tests, but due to lack of hard evidence and Sweeney's family connections, his cousin was a powerful congressman, Ness was never able to formally charge him, leading to a decades-long frustration.
The personal torment of Dr. Sweeney following Ness's intense pressure is another chilling side detail. After being questioned, Sweeney voluntarily committed himself to a mental institution in 1938. Interestingly, the torso murders officially stopped after Sweeney was institutionalized. From his confinement, Sweeney reportedly continued to send cryptic, taunting postcards to Ness, bragging about the murders and mocking Ness's failure to catch him. The evidence is circumstantial, but the coincidence of the crimes stopping when Sweeney was locked away is a powerful, dark synchronicity that has convinced many historians and cold case experts of his guilt. Another less-known but significant suspect was Frank Dolezal, a construction worker who was arrested in 1939 and confessed to the murder of Florence Polio, but later recanted his confession, claiming police had beaten him until he complied. Dolezal died in the Cuyahoga County Jail, ruled a suicide, but the circumstances were suspicious, raising the horrifying possibility that the police had arrested and silenced an innocent man, allowing the real killer to remain free. The cloud of scandal and corruption that surrounded Dolezal's death further complicated the official narrative and tainted the entire investigation. The social context of the crimes is critical. The torso killer preyed on individuals who were easily forgotten. The Depression had created a vast, moving underclass, and the police often showed minimal interest in the disappearances of those who were marginalized. This societal indifference created a vacuum that the killer exploited, knowing that the loss of a drifter or a struggling prostitute would generate little sustained public or political pressure, making his actions a chilling indictment of 1930s class division. The failure to definitively solve the case became the great stain on Eliot Ness's otherwise celebrated career. He was a man who famously beat organized crime, but was utterly defeated by a solitary, methodical killer operating in the shadows. He severely damaged his reputation in Cleveland, and he left the city shortly after the shantytown fires, forever marked by his inability to bring the Mad Butcher to justice. Despite the historical nature, the case has been revisited repeatedly using modern forensic techniques. In the early 2000s, investigators attempted to use DNA found on a handful of surviving pieces of evidence, but the results were either inconclusive or yielded DNA that did not match the records of known suspects, including the family of Dr. Sweeney. The age and poor preservation of the evidence have made definitive genetic analysis nearly impossible, allowing the mystery to endure. The lasting horror of the torso murders lies in the killer's signature, the final act of stripping the victim of their identity by removing their face and severing their limbs. It was a terrifying statement of power and finality. The victims became known not by their names, but by the gruesome locations where their parts were found. The Lady of the Lake, the Unknown Man. The killer's ability to erase their existence is arguably his most terrifying legacy. The torso killer stands apart from other serial killers of the era because of his surgical skill and the absolute lack of any clear emotional or sexual connection to the victims left at the scene. He was a machine of methodical destruction, capable of moving large, mutilated bodies without leaving definitive traces, suggesting access to private vehicles and, potentially, private facilities for the initial stages of his dark work. To this day, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run remains an unidentified shadow, his reign of terror a dark, indelible chapter in American crime history.